Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow? As if your accomplishments were always overshadowed by another person? This is a feeling that many of us experience, but few know as well as Ishmael, Abraham's first son. His story is a testament to hope, rejection, and ultimately redemption. It is a narrative that challenges our notions of destiny and makes us question, do God's promises have an expiration date? Get ready to dive into the fascinating journey of Ishmael, a man whose name means God hears, but who must have often wondered if God was really listening. This is a story that will shake your convictions and perhaps change the way you see your own life. Genesis 16:1-4 transports us to a crucial moment in the story of Abraham and Sarai. The couple, already of advanced age, face the harsh reality of infertility. God's promise to make Abraham the father of many nations seemed more distant by the day. It was in this context of despair and impatience that Sarai made a decision that would change the course of history. She offered her Egyptian servant Hagar as a substitute to bear an heir. Then Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. This decision, though common in the culture of the time, triggered a series of events that no one could foresee. Abraham, driven by the desire to see God's promise fulfilled, accepted Sarai's proposal. The biblical text tells us with a simplicity that is almost brutal that he went into Hagar and she conceived. Genesis 15:2-4 gives us a glimpse of the earlier context, where Abraham expressed his concern to God about not having an heir. "O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." God's response was clear and direct. "This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir." With this promise in mind, we can imagine the hope and expectation that surrounded the birth of Ishmael. Here was, finally, the promised heir, or so they thought. Genesis 16:11-12 provides a prophetic insight into Ishmael's destiny, even while he was still in his mother's womb. "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." These words, spoken by the angel of the Lord, paint a complex picture of Ishmael's future. On one hand, his name, which means God hears, is a testimony to divine attention. On the other hand, the description of his nature and his destiny suggests a life of conflict and isolation. When the moment of birth finally arrived, Genesis 16:15-16 tells us, "And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son whom Hagar bore, Ishmael." Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Imagine the scene. Abraham, a man of 86 years, holding his firstborn in his arms. The years of waiting, the nights of doubt, all seem to have been worth it in that moment. Ishmael was the personification of the promise, the living proof that God fulfills his word. In the years that followed, we can imagine Ishmael growing up as Abraham's apparent heir. He likely learned the skills necessary to lead a large clan, was instructed in the traditions of his people, and undoubtedly heard countless times the story of God's promise to his father. But Ishmael's life was about to take an unexpected turn. As he grew, believing himself to be the child of the promise, God's plans were unfolding in a way that no one could foresee. The story of Ishmael reminds us that God's promises do not always come to pass in the way we expect. Sometimes we are called to play a different role than we imagined in the grand divine plan. Ishmael, the child of the unfulfilled promise, was about to face a reality that would test his faith, his resilience, and his character. As Ishmael grew into a strong and skilled young man, he likely had no idea of the dramatic changes that were about to come. His position as the firstborn and apparent heir of Abraham seemed secure. After all, he was the fruit of a divine promise, wasn't he? But God's ways are mysterious, and Ishmael's destiny was about to take an unexpected turn that would change not only his life, but the course of history. Years passed, and Ishmael's life followed a seemingly tranquil course. He grew strong and skilled, learning the traditions of his people and the responsibilities that would one day be his as Abraham's heir. However, destiny had a surprise in store that would change everything. Genesis 21:1 1:3 recounts an extraordinary event that shook the foundations of Abraham's family. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. The birth of Isaac was nothing short of a miracle. Sarah, who had long since passed the age of bearing children, was now cradling a baby in her arms. This event, while a great joy for Abraham and Sarah, cast a shadow over Ishmael's future. Imagine the impact this must have had on Ishmael. For years, he had been the only son, the center of his father's attention and hopes. Now suddenly, there was another boy, a boy born of Abraham's legitimate wife, a boy whose arrival had been announced by God himself. The family dynamics changed drastically. Ishmael, who had once been the unquestionable heir, now found himself in an uncertain position. The tensions that already existed between Sarah and Hagar, Ishmael's mother, likely intensified with Isaac's arrival. These tensions reached their peak in an incident reported in Genesis 21:9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. The Hebrew word used here for mocking can mean both laughing and scorning. Regardless, Ishmael's actions were seen as a threat by Sarah. Sarah's reaction was swift and harsh. Genesis 21:10-11 tells us, "Therefore she said to Abraham, 'Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son Isaac.' And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son." We can only imagine the emotional turmoil this situation caused for Ishmael. Suddenly, he found himself not only relegated to the background, but at risk of being completely excluded from the family. The boy who once thought he was the fulfillment of God's promise now faced an uncertain future. It is important to note that Abraham's reaction to Sarah's demand was not immediate agreement. The text tells us that the idea seemed very displeasing in Abraham's sight. This suggests that despite Isaac's birth, Abraham still had a strong emotional bond with Ishmael and was concerned for his well-being. However, God intervenes in this complex family situation. In Genesis 21:12-13 we read, "But God said to Abraham, 'Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed.'" This divine intervention is significant for several reasons. First, it confirms Isaac as the heir of the promise made to Abraham. This clarifies any ambiguity regarding Ishmael's status as a potential heir. Second, it shows God's compassion for Ishmael. Although he is not the son of the promise, God does not abandon him. On the contrary, he promises to make him a great nation as well. For Ishmael, this must have been a time of great confusion and pain. He went from being the only son to being the undesired son, from being the center of his father's attention to being seen as a threat by his stepmother, from having a secure future as Abraham's heir to facing an uncertain future away from everything he knew. Yet even in this difficult situation, we can see God's hand at work. Although Ishmael was not the son of promise in the sense of being an ancestor of the Messiah, God still had a plan for his life. The promise that he would become a great nation was not a consolation prize, but a testament to God's care and faithfulness, even in circumstances that may seem unfair to human eyes. This part of Ishmael's story teaches us several important lessons. First, it reminds us that God's plans do not always align with our expectations. Ishmael likely grew up believing he would be Abraham's heir, only to discover that this was not the role God had for him. Second, we see that God is faithful even when circumstances seem to indicate otherwise. Although Ishmael was cast out from Abraham's family, God did not abandon him. On the contrary, he had a specific plan for Ishmael's life. Third, this story shows us that God can use difficult and painful situations to fulfill his purposes. Ishmael's expulsion must have been a traumatic experience, but it was through this experience that God began to shape Ishmael for the future he had planned. Finally, Ishmael's story at this point reminds us that our identity and worth are not determined by our social standing or by the opinions of others, but by what God says about us. Although Ishmael lost his status in Abraham's family, he did not lose his value in God's eyes. As the tension in Abraham's family reached its breaking point, Ishmael found himself on the brink of a great change. He was about to leave behind everything he knew and embark on a journey that would test his strength, faith, and resilience. The boy who once thought he was heir to a great promise now faced an uncertain future in the desert. But as we will see, the God who hears, the meaning of the name Ishmael, was not finished with him yet. Ishmael's life was about to change drastically. The dawn brought not only a new day, but the beginning of a journey that would test his strength and faith like never before. Genesis 21:14 transports us to this crucial moment. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder. And he gave the boy to her and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. The biblical text, in its characteristic conciseness, does not provide details about the emotions involved in this separation. We do not know if there were tears, hugs, or words of farewell. What we do know is that Abraham provided the bare minimum necessary for the immediate survival of Hagar and Ishmael: bread and water. With these limited supplies, mother and son set off into the unknown. The wilderness of Beersheba, where Hagar and Ishmael were headed, was not a welcoming place. It was an arid region, with few natural resources and many dangers. For Hagar, a former Egyptian slave, and Ishmael, a young boy accustomed to the relative safety of Abraham's encampment, this new environment must have been frightening and disorienting. It wasn't long before the harsh reality of the desert began to hit. Genesis 21:15-16 shows us the despair that came over them. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot. For she said to herself, "Let me not see the death of the boy." So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. The water, the most precious resource in the desert, had run out. The text tells us that Hagar placed the boy under one of the shrubs. The word "placed" suggests an act of desperation. Hagar, unable to bear seeing her son suffer, puts him in the shade and moves away. The distance mentioned, about a bow shot, gives us an idea of Hagar's anguish. She wanted to be far enough away not to witness Ishmael's suffering, but close enough to still be with him. It is at this moment of deep distress that God intervenes. Genesis 21:17-19 recounts, "And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, 'What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation.' Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink." This passage is filled with meaning. First, we notice that God heard the boy's voice. This not only reaffirms the meaning of Ishmael's name, God hears, but also shows us that, even in the midst of the desert, seemingly abandoned, God had not forgotten them. The divine intervention comes in the form of a renewed promise and immediate provision. The angel of God reassures Hagar that Ishmael will become a great nation. This promise, originally made to Abraham, is now repeated directly to Hagar. In her moment of greatest despair, she receives the assurance that her son's future is secure in God's hands. Furthermore, God opened her eyes to see a well of water. This phrase is intriguing. It suggests that the well was already there, but Hagar, in her despair, had not noticed it. God's intervention was not to create a new well, but to allow Hagar to see what was already present. Sometimes the solution to our problems is closer than we think, but we need a divine perspective to see it. With their immediate needs met and God's promise renewed, Hagar and Ishmael begin a new phase of their journey. Genesis 21:20-21 gives us a glimpse into how Ishmael's life unfolded from that moment. "And God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the desert, and became a bowman. And he lived in the desert of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt." This brief summary tells us a lot about Ishmael's development. The phrase "God was with the boy" is profoundly significant. Despite the difficult circumstances, Ishmael was not alone. The presence and blessing of God accompanied him, guiding him through the challenges of the desert. The text tells us that Ishmael grew up. This simple word encapsulates years of physical, emotional, and spiritual development. Ishmael went from a scared and disoriented young boy in the desert to a man capable of surviving and thriving in this hostile environment. The mention that Ishmael lived in the desert indicates that he adapted to his new surroundings. The desert, which initially seemed like a place of exile and death, became his home. Ishmael learned to navigate its arid landscapes, to find water and food, and to protect himself from the dangers that surrounded him. The text also informs us that Ishmael became a bowman. This skill was crucial for survival in the desert. It allowed him to hunt for food and defend himself against threats. Becoming a skilled archer required constant practice, patience, and precision, qualities that would be valuable in his future leadership. Specifically, the text mentions that Ishmael lived in the desert of Paran. This region, located in the Sinai Peninsula, was known for its aridity and rugged terrain. The fact that Ishmael was able to establish himself there is a testament to his resilience and adaptability. Finally, we are told that Ishmael's mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. This detail is significant for several reasons. It shows that Hagar maintained connections to her homeland, Egypt. It also indicates that Ishmael was now of marrying age and ready to start his own family, taking the first steps toward fulfilling God's promise that he would become a great nation. Ishmael's journey in the desert is a story of transformation and growth. What began as a painful expulsion became the catalyst for the fulfillment of God's plan for his life. In the desert, far from the comfort and safety he once knew, Ishmael was forged into a man capable of leading and thriving. This part of Ishmael's narrative shows us how God often uses difficult circumstances to shape our character and prepare us for our destiny. The desert, though challenging, was the place where Ishmael developed the skills and strength of character necessary to become the father of a nation. The story also illustrates God's faithfulness to his promises, even when circumstances seem to contradict them. The promise that Ishmael would become a great nation seemed impossible in the midst of the desert, but God was working to fulfill it, even in the most challenging moments. Ishmael's experience in the desert teaches us about adaptability and resilience. He not only survived in the desert, but learned to thrive there. This encourages us not to give up when we face challenging environments or situations, but to seek ways to grow and adapt. Finally, God's intervention at Hagar and Ishmael's moment of greatest despair reminds us that we are never beyond God's reach. Even when we feel completely lost and hopeless, God hears us and is ready to help us. As Ishmael grew and established himself in the desert of Paran, he was preparing for the next chapter of his life. The young boy who once wandered lost in the desert was now becoming a skilled archer and the future patriarch of a great people. The desert, which initially seemed like a place of exile, had become the training ground for Ishmael's destiny. Time passed, and Ishmael grew in the austere environment of the desert. The young man who had arrived scared and disoriented transformed into a strong and skilled man. Genesis 21:20 gives us a glimpse of this transformation. And God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the desert and became a bowman. The desert of Paran, mentioned in Genesis 21:21, was a hostile environment. Characterized by vast stretches of sand, steep rocks, and sparse vegetation, it was a place that demanded strength, cunning, and determination to survive. Ishmael learned to read the signs of nature, to find water in unlikely places, and to hunt skillfully. The mention that Ishmael became a bowman is significant. This skill was crucial in the desert, both for hunting and for defense. Ishmael likely spent hours practicing, honing his aim and strength. The bow and arrow became extensions of his own body, tools he wielded with skill and precision. Life in the desert shaped Ishmael not just physically, but also in character. He learned to be patient, waiting for the right moment to act, whether in hunting or searching for water. He developed resilience, enduring the scorching heat of the day and the biting cold of the night. He became observant, able to detect the slightest signs of danger or opportunity in his surroundings. Genesis 21:21 tells us, "And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt." This verse provides more information about the life of Ishmael. The fact that he lived in the wilderness of Paran suggests that he was no longer a wandering nomad, but had established some form of permanent settlement. This indicates that Ishmael had not only learned to survive in the desert, but to thrive in it. The mention that his mother arranged for him to have a wife from Egypt is intriguing. It shows that Hagar still maintained connections with her homeland, despite the years in the desert. It also indicates that Ishmael was now of marriageable age and ready to start his own family. This marriage would be the first step toward the fulfillment of God's promise that Ishmael would become a great nation. Ishmael's Egyptian wife would have brought her own skills and knowledge to the union. Raised in an advanced civilization, she might have introduced new techniques in weaving, cooking, or even water conservation, skills that would be valuable in the desert environment. Over time, Ishmael and his wife would have had children. Genesis 25:12-16 gives us a list of Ishmael's 12 sons. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael was Nebajoth, and then Kedar, Adbeel, and Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. Each of these sons would become the patriarch of his own tribe. The names of these sons are significant, as many of them appear in other parts of the Bible and in historical records as names of Arab tribes. This indicates that God's promise to Ishmael was being fulfilled. He was indeed becoming the father of a great nation. Ishmael's life in the desert was not easy, but he had found his place within it. His skills as an archer made him a respected hunter and a feared protector. He knew the secrets of the desert, where to find water, which plants were edible, how to navigate by the stars. This knowledge was vital not only for his survival, but also for leading and protecting his growing family. As his children grew, Ishmael passed on his skills and knowledge to them. He taught them how to use the bow and arrow, track animals, and find water. But more than that, he instilled in them the lessons he had learned about resilience, adaptability, and faith in God. The promise that God had made to Hagar years earlier, that he would make Ishmael a great nation, was being fulfilled before his eyes. The frightened boy who once wandered lost in the desert had now become the patriarch of a growing clan. The Ishmaelite tribe spread throughout the desert, each developing its own traditions and lifestyles, but all united by their common heritage. They became known for their skill as archers, their endurance in the desert, and their fierce independence. Genesis 25:18 gives us an idea of the extent of the territory that Ishmael's descendants came to occupy. "And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria, and he died in the presence of all his brethren." This description covers a vast area, extending from the northeastern Arabian Peninsula to the border of Egypt. Ishmael's life as an archer of the desert was not just a matter of physical survival. It was also a spiritual journey. Far from Abraham's camp, where he had grown up hearing about his father's God, Ishmael had to discover his own relationship with the divine. The desert, in its vastness and silence, offered ample opportunities for reflection and contemplation. On starry nights, while watching over his flock or his camp, Ishmael may have meditated on the God who had saved him as a child, the God who had promised to make him a great nation. The divine promise must have been a source of strength and purpose for Ishmael. In difficult moments, when the desert seemed relentless and the future uncertain, the remembrance of that promise would have sustained him. He knew he was not wandering aimlessly but fulfilling a divinely ordained destiny. As his family grew and his tribes expanded, Ishmael must have seen God's hand at work. Each new child, each new flock, each new water source discovered was a testament to divine faithfulness. The desert, which once seemed a place of exile, had become the birthplace of a new nation. Ishmael's skill with the bow was not just a survival tool, but also a symbol of his identity and that of his people. The Ishmaelites became known and respected for their prowess with the bow. This reputation would serve them well, both in hunting and in war, and would become an integral part of their cultural heritage. As the years went by, Ishmael saw his children grow and form their own families. He became not only a father, but also a grandfather, a respected elder whose wisdom and experience were valued throughout the community. His knowledge of the desert, his survival skills, and his leadership were crucial for the establishment and expansion of the Ishmaelite tribes. As he aged, Ishmael must have reflected on his journey, from the pampered child in Abraham's camp to the exiled young man, and finally to the patriarch of a growing people. Each stage of his life had been marked by challenges, but also by growth and the constant presence of God. The story of Ishmael as the archer of the desert is a testament to resilience, adaptability, and faith. From an uncertain and tumultuous beginning, he forged a lasting legacy. His skills, developed in the harsh conditions of the desert, allowed not only for his survival, but the flourishing of an entire people. The desert, which once seemed a place of punishment and exile, had become the cradle of a new nation. The vast stretches of sand and rock, which initially appeared so inhospitable, were now home to a strong and independent people. Ishmael's skills as an archer, his leadership, and his faith had transformed the desert from a place of death into a place of life and growth. Thus, the archer of the desert fulfilled his destiny. Ishmael, the son of the promise that once seemed lost, indeed became the father of a great nation, just as God had promised. As the years passed, God's promise to Ishmael began to be visibly fulfilled. The young archer of the desert had become the patriarch of a rapidly expanding clan. Genesis 25:12-16 provides us with a detailed record of Ishmael's descendants. These are the generations of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael was Nebajoth, then Kedar, Adbeel, and Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their families. This list of 12 sons is significant for several reasons. The number 12 echoes the promise made to Abraham about his descendants through Isaac. Furthermore, many of these names appear elsewhere in the Bible and in historical records as names of Arab tribes, indicating the enduring expansion and influence of Ishmael's descendants. Each of these sons became the leader of his own tribe, establishing themselves in different areas of the desert and developing their own traditions and ways of life. However, they all remained united by their common heritage and respect for their father, Ishmael. The promise that God had made to Abraham about Ishmael in Genesis 17:20 was being fulfilled. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. The Ishmaelite tribes became known for their skills as archers, their resilience in the desert, and their independence. They developed a nomadic culture, moving with their flocks in search of pastures and water. Their mobility and knowledge of the terrain made them formidable, both as allies and as adversaries. The influence of the Ishmaelite tribes extended over a vast area. Genesis 25:18 gives us an idea of the extent of their territory. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt, going toward Assyria. He settled before all his brethren. This description encompasses a significant area, stretching from the northeast Arabian Peninsula to the border of Egypt. The Ishmaelite tribes controlled important trade routes linking Egypt, Mesopotamia, and southern Arabia. This gave them a strategic position in regional trade, allowing them to thrive and expand their influence. The skills that Ishmael had developed as an archer and survivor in the desert were passed down to his sons and grandsons. Each generation perfected these skills, adapting to changes in the environment and the challenges they faced. The Ishmaelite tribes became masters of the desert warfare, using their mobility and knowledge of the terrain to overcome larger or better equipped adversaries. Life in the desert shaped not only the physical abilities of the Ishmaelites, but also their culture and spirituality. The harsh and unpredictable environment fostered a deep appreciation for divine providence. Faith in an all-powerful God, who had guided and protected their ancestor Ishmael, became a central part of Ishmaelite identity. The tribes developed rich oral traditions, passing down from generation to generation the stories of Ishmael, his exile in the desert, and the divine intervention that saved his life. These stories served not only to preserve their history, but also to reinforce their identity as a chosen people, destined for greatness despite their humble origins. As the tribes grew and expanded, they began to interact more frequently with other nations in the region. Their skills as warriors and their control over important trade routes made them valuable allies and formidable enemies. Neighboring nations learned to respect and often fear the people of the desert. The expansion of the Ishmaelites was not only geographical, but also in terms of cultural influence. Their skills as archers, their resilience in the desert, and their survival techniques were admired and often emulated by other peoples. Their expertise in navigating the desert and their knowledge of trade routes made them indispensable intermediaries in regional trade. The Ishmaelite tribes also excelled in animal husbandry, particularly camels. These animals, perfectly adapted to the desert environment, became an integral part of their economy and way of life. The Ishmaelites' skill in raising and training camels made them valuable partners in trade and transportation for other nations in the region. The language and customs of the Ishmaelites also spread with their expansion. Their nomadic way of life, adapted to the harsh desert conditions, influenced the cultures they came into contact with. Elements of their language, likely a primitive Semitic dialect, may have influenced the development of later Arabic languages. As the influence of the Ishmaelites grew, they began to establish more permanent settlements in strategic locations. These became centers of trade and culture, where Ishmaelite traditions mingled with those of other peoples. Some of these oasis cities would become important urban centers in the following centuries. The leadership of Ishmael was fundamental in this process of expansion and consolidation. Even in his old age, he continued to guide his people, resolving disputes among the tribes and maintaining unity among his descendants. His wisdom, acquired through years of survival in the desert and leadership of his people, was highly valued. The Ishmaelite tribes also developed significant diplomatic skills. Their strategic position among various regional powers forced them to learn the art of negotiation and alliance building. They became adept at maintaining their independence while benefiting from relations with more powerful neighbors. The religion of the Ishmaelites, based on the monotheistic faith that Ishmael inherited from Abraham, evolved over time. Although they maintained belief in a single all-powerful God, their religious practices likely incorporated elements from the cultures they encountered. This fusion of traditions would contribute to the rich cultural tapestry of the ancient Middle East. God's promise to make Ishmael a great nation was being fulfilled in ways that went beyond mere population growth. The Ishmaelites were becoming a significant cultural, economic, and political force in the region. Their influence extended far beyond the borders of the desert that once threatened the life of their ancestor. As Ishmael aged, he could see the fulfillment of the divine promise in his own life. His 12 sons had become leaders of prosperous tribes, and his grandsons and great-grandsons continued to expand the influence and legacy of the Ishmaelites. The boy who had once been cast into the desert had become the patriarch of a powerful and respected people. The story of Ishmael as the father of a nation is a testament to the fulfillment of divine promises and the power of human resilience. From a humble and uncertain beginning in the desert, he and his descendants forged a lasting legacy that would influence the history of the Middle East for generations. Years passed since Ishmael left his father Abraham's camp. The young exile had become a respected patriarch, father to 12 princes and leader of a prosperous people. Meanwhile, far away in the desert, Abraham's life had also continued. Sarah had passed away, and Abraham, now a very old man, was approaching the end of his earthly journey. It was in this context that a significant event occurred, recorded in Genesis 25:9. The verse tells us, "And Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre." This brief verse reveals a moment of silent reconciliation between the half-brothers long separated. Ishmael, the son of the desert, and Isaac, the son of the promise, came together to pay their last respects to their father. The fact that both were present and cooperated in Abraham's burial suggests that, despite their differences and years of separation, there remained a bond between them. Abraham's funeral served as a moment of unity for the entire family. It was an opportunity for Ishmael to revisit his roots, to see how life had unfolded for his father and half-brother. Perhaps it was also a time for reflection on the divergent paths their lives had taken, and on God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises to both. After the funeral, Genesis 25:17-18 gives us the final information about Ishmael's life. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria, and he settled in the presence of all his brethren. The mention of Ishmael's age, 137 years, indicates that he lived a long and full life. The phrase "was gathered to his people" was a common expression used to describe a peaceful death, suggesting that Ishmael departed this life having fulfilled his purpose. The description of the territory inhabited by Ishmael's descendants is significant. It shows the extent of the influence of the Ishmaelite tribes, which spread over a vast area from Havilah, possibly in eastern Arabia, to Shur, near the border of Egypt. The phrase, "he settled in the presence of all his brethren," echoes God's original promise about Ishmael and suggests that he and his descendants maintained their independence and distinct identity. Ishmael's legacy continued long after his death. His 12 tribes grew and multiplied, becoming a significant presence in the ancient Near East. They became known for their skills as archers, their resilience in the desert, and their independent spirit, all characteristics that reflected Ishmael's own life. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael is revered as a prophet and as the ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad. He is seen as an example of obedience to God, particularly in the episode where he and his father Abraham were willing to offer a sacrifice to God, a story that in the Quran is attributed to Ishmael, while in the Bible it is attributed to Isaac. In the New Testament, Paul uses the story of Ishmael and Isaac as an allegory in his letter to the Galatians. In Galatians 4:22, 23, 28, 30 he writes, "For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and the other by the free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise. But as then, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman." Paul uses this story to illustrate the difference between law and grace, between works and faith. Although his interpretation casts Ishmael in a less favorable light, it demonstrates how Ishmael's story continued to be relevant and reinterpreted long after his death. The legacy of Ishmael is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, he is the father of a great nation, fulfilling God's promise. On the other, his story is often viewed in contrast to that of Isaac, representing different aspects of the divine plan. However, what remains clear is that God was faithful to his promise to Ishmael, blessing him and making him the father of a powerful nation. Ishmael's story reminds us that God's ways are not always what we expect. Although Ishmael was not the son of the promise in the messianic sense, he still had an important role in God's plan. His life is a testament to how God can use difficult circumstances to shape an individual and fulfill his purposes. Ishmael's journey from rejected son to father of a nation is a story of overcoming, resilience, and the fulfillment of divine promises. It is a narrative that continues to resonate through the ages, offering hope and inspiration to those who feel marginalized or forgotten. Ultimately, Ishmael's story reminds us that each person has a unique role in God's grand plan. Even when circumstances seem against us, God can use our experiences to shape us and prepare us for a greater purpose. This is how the story of Ishmael ends. A man whose life was marked by challenges, but also by extraordinary blessings. From a humble beginning as the son of a slave, he became the patriarch of a great nation, fulfilling the promise that God made to his father Abraham. Ishmael's journey is a powerful testament to God's faithfulness, and the resilience of the human spirit. It reminds us that no matter how difficult our circumstances may be, God has a plan for each of us. If you have been touched by this story and want to learn more about the great narratives of the Bible and how they apply to our lives today, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos, where we will continue to explore the fascinating lives of biblical characters and the lessons we can learn from them. Remember, each story in the Bible has something unique to teach us. As we delve into these narratives, we discover not only about the people who lived thousands of years ago, but also about ourselves and the God who created us. So
Let the Word of God touch your heart, like a light guiding you through the darkest moments. Every step in faith is a journey filled with hope. We are never alone on this path, for He is always by our side. Open your heart and let His love transform you, helping you spread that light to those around you.
the subscribe button now and join us on this journey of discovery and spiritual growth.
Let the Word of God touch your heart, like a light guiding you through the darkest moments. Every step in faith is a journey filled with hope. We are never alone on this path, for He is always by our side. Open your heart and let His love transform you, helping you spread that light to those around you.
The next video.